Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon, December 16th of 2020. It's been a while since I've been with you here on our Facebook Live, our FC Live sessions here in Franklin Covey. So for those of you who've been with us before, thank you for joining us. My name is Paolo, in case any of you have not been with me before in these Facebook Live sessions. So again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And this is the last session in a series that we've entitled Real Challenges, Real Solutions. Now, why real challenges, real solutions? What we're discussing in these sessions And what we've discussed in the prior 3 sessions are real challenges, real questions, real experiences and situations that you, our viewers, our audience members, have shared with us, be it in Facebook live chats, be it private messages, or for those of you who joined us in any of our Zoom sessions, perhaps you've shared with us on those sessions. Some of these questions, some of these experiences have also been collected through direct message, be on our website or in our Facebook page. So thank you for sending in your questions. What we've done is we've made an effort to collate and basically to summarize questions and bring those with like themes and like experiences together so that we can make an effort to address them in one common session. Now, in these sessions, what we aim to do is share with you principles, concepts, even practices that we, your facilitators, have been able to practice, experience, and see in action ourselves. So most of these principles, most of these concepts, yes, are coming from our solutions. For those of you who are familiar and perhaps who prefer to use the term workshops, from our workshops, from our content, sometimes even from the books which are related to those workshops. Now, the idea of these sessions is not so much to share everything or to make a full disclosure for this full discussion of the concepts and the behaviors and the principles, but rather to share with you what we as your facilitators have found to be most insightful, most important, and have experienced to have the highest degree of success in our own lives, or perhaps with our clients and those people that we work with and relate with the most. So again, not necessarily to cover everything, but rather to share with you our own experiences, the success stories we found, and even perhaps the challenges that we've experienced ourselves. And the effort will be to apply these to your own questions, your own experiences. So I invite you not just to stay tuned and stay with me for the next hour or so this afternoon, but also for those of you who haven't had the chance to watch our 3 prior sessions in this series, Real Challenges, Real Solutions, I invite you to watch this as well. So just to give you an idea, the previous challenges and previous sessions that we've had were the first one, there is no you in responsibility, where Menen, my colleague, both a facilitator and a coach and an educator, discussed the idea of responsibility, accountability, and blame. In fact, much of the session focused on blame, the feelings around it, the motivations, what are the effects of blame? And then brought it home to say that, why is there no you in responsibility? Because really, it starts with looking at ourselves. Now, the second session was with Lippy, and Lippy discussed emotions, emotional intelligence, for those of you who are more familiar with that term. And in that session, which we entitled It's More Than a Feeling, Lippy discussed recognizing, managing, and even leveraging our own emotions once we're in touch with them to bring us greater success, be it in our own personal endeavors or in our relationships. And in truth, for the most part, being able to recognize and manage our emotions really impacts our relationships, whether personal or professional, very, very, very deeply. And in our last session, which was entitled Listening with Cues, my colleague Anna, a facilitator as well with us in Franklin Covey, discussed engagement, listening to understand, listening empathically, and the importance of all of these in establishing genuine connections. And therefore, in the corporate or the professional setting, being able to establish and promote the level of engagement and therefore the willingness to invest, collaborate, and creatively contribute from each of our employees, each of our direct reports in our teams. Now, in this session, the way I'd like to see it is this really brings everything together. This afternoon, we'll be discussing success in trust. Now, if we're to look at it, it sounds like and feels like a very big, very broad topic. So we'll try to break it down a bit. So that's what we're going to do this afternoon. We'll be breaking it down quite a bit. And in fact, I'll be inviting you. I'm taking a page here from Menen's book. I like the way he handled his session last week. And I feel that it would be great to try and replicate that. So I invite you to engage with me and engage with one another in this session. And I'm going to be inviting you to join us on slido.com. So in a while, we'll be bringing up a page which contains a QR code. So I'll let you know when that's up. And what I invite you to do is if you have another device, say you're viewing and you're joining us through your laptops or maybe a tablet, and let's say you have a phone with you, then the easiest would be to use your phone just to take a picture of the QR code on the screen. It will take you directly to the Slido presentation. And there I'll have anywhere from 3 to 5 questions, depending on the pace, depending on the dynamics that we have in our session today. So later on, I'll bring that up. I'm cueing you in today because as part of my invitation, I'd really invite you to engage. As we said, this is real questions, real solutions. So we're trying, or I'll try rather, to move a little bit away from the pure lecture format and source some of the answers, some of the thoughts from you. You can, of course, in our Facebook page, in the comments, in the chat, bring up your own experiences, your own questions as well. Let me know. Let me know your thoughts. And perhaps the first thing I'll ask you to do, as I've done in previous sessions, is let us know. Let us know where you're joining us from this afternoon. I'm in Mandaluyong City. Anyone in the same city as I am? Let us know if you're from Makati, you're joining us from Makati, from Quezon City, perhaps from the province somewhere. Or previously, we've even had some viewers and audience members from other countries. So let us know where you're joining us from. Now, as I mentioned, we'll be breaking things down this afternoon, dissecting to a certain degree. So first, success and trust. What do we mean by success and trust? Now, success and trust can be seen from at least 2 different dimensions. And we'll try and tackle or touch on these 2 dimensions throughout the session this afternoon. So the first dimension will be success in building trust and in trusting other people, having trust within, let's say, our circle, whether it be our family, our teams, or organizations. And then the other dimension of success in trust is achieving success in our goals, in our objectives, in our priorities as a result of having high trust. Now, we'll see as we go through the discussion this afternoon how those go together, how they go together very, very tightly. Now, for some people, it may be intuitive, it may be obvious. For some, perhaps not so. And that's what we're going to go into. Now, the way we will handle or approach today's discussion will be, I'll basically be jumping off 3 questions that we received from you, our viewers. Now, as I mentioned, for the most part, these questions have been summarized or in a sense collapsed from various questions, perhaps articulated in slightly different ways, but we felt the core theme, the core experience, and the core question was the same. So the 3 questions, I'll just mention them beforehand here, and we'll discuss them each with some depth or to some degree of depth as we go through. So the first one is, how do I promote trust? First question we're going to tackle this afternoon. The second question we're going to tackle and have a discussion on this afternoon will be, how can I stay firm in trusting others' intentions and not conclude or even not assume that their mistakes are because of bad judgment? Now, the third and last question, or at least the third and last starter questions, the way I'd like to put it, that will be approaching and tackling this afternoon will be, how do I promote interdependence and avoid the silo trap? So we'll take on each of those questions one by one. We'll go into them particular length and depth, and we'll see how they actually relate very tightly with one another. I'll pause momentarily here just to give you a chance to catch up, perhaps collect your thoughts. If you'd like to contribute any questions, if you feel like any of those 3 questions rings a bell with you, you can say, I agree with that. I'm particularly interested in question number 1, how do I promote trust, for example? Or perhaps you'd like to think of follow-on questions that you feel would deepen the discussion. So I invite you to share any thoughts that you have. So for now, I'll give you a few seconds just to let us know where you're joining us from. And let me know who's with us this afternoon. Okay. It seems like it's a pretty quiet room or a pretty quiet audience to this point. So let's take on question number one and let's start the discussion there. So question number one, how do I promote trust? Now, sounds like a rather big question. In fact, as I was thinking through this question and thinking to myself, how can we best address this question? How can we give a meaningful answer to this question? I stumbled upon, actually, I thought about quite a number of things. In fact, I discussed this as well, first with my wife, and then I also looked into other resources, other references. So how do I promote trust? Perhaps the first sub-question or follow-on question I would ask is this: where is this coming from? And in relation to that, where are we now? Now, when in that second question, what I'm trying to get to is an understanding of, in asking, how do I promote trust? What is the situation? What is the context that we are starting from? Now, if we were to think about this either in terms of let's say, a family or a team or even an organization, a bigger organization, some questions might be, are we coming from a context or a situation where there is distrust and where distrust is prevalent, and therefore that becomes the norm or the baseline? Right now, there is distrust, and therefore I want to promote trust. Is there active distrust? Is there simply no trust, meaning people having doubts about one another, people being unsure as to whether to trust, what to believe, whom to believe? So are we starting from a position of negative trust or no trust? And therefore, in saying, how do I promote trust, we actually want to bring it to a position of having trust or having stronger trust. Another way of looking at it, another possibility I thought of would be, in saying, how do I promote trust, are we asking, how do I influence people to trust me? And therefore, is it an individual? Is it a personal question? Therefore, how do I promote trust for myself, or how do I promote trust towards myself? That is a valid question as well, and one that can be particularly relevant. And while it may sound selfish, it may sound self-centered, as we'll see in a little while, it actually is an important question. How do I influence? How do I encourage people to trust me? How do I build trust towards me? That's a very important question. As we'll see in a while, it actually starts there, this journey of trust. And then the last dimension that I thought of would be, in saying, how do I promote trust? Are we asking, how do I encourage people to trust one another? Again, if we were to look at the context of a team or an organization, are we asking, how can I encourage my team members, my direct reports, or perhaps our whole organization to have trust towards one another, not just towards me, perhaps as a leader, but towards one another? Is that what we're asking? Now, all of these can be the dimensions, definitions of promoting trust. Now, I'd like you to think about which dimension rings true to you the most. If you could let me know in the chat, that would be great. In the meantime, what I'll ask you to do next is just to, for those of you who have the device, have the capability, and who are willing, and I do hope that all of you are willing, I invite you to scan the QR code that you will see in your screen in a moment. And it should take you to slido.com. For those of you who may have difficulty with QR codes, you'll also see the event number there, and that is 47751. So number 47751. The easiest, of course, will be to simply scan the QR code with your camera. In most devices, it will automatically take you to the web page. If you have any problems out there, then I invite you to log on to slido.com and then just punch in the event code number 47751. Now, it should take you to the page that you see on the screens now. I'll give you a few moments to do that. And then as we go through the discussion, I will activate different polls. So for the most part, one of my favorite tools in poll types is actually the word cloud, because it gives you a very visual representation of the responses that people are giving. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, responses here will be anonymous, and therefore there will be a relatively high level of privacy and should I say, confidentiality here. So I invite you to share with us your honest thoughts, your honest opinions. I will not dig in, we will not dig in and say who exactly said this. We're more interested really in understanding the general energy, the general experiences shared by the group. So for those of you who may not have the capability, perhaps there are restrictions or perhaps your devices would limit your capability to log on to slido.com, I will also verbalize the questions here. Of course, it would be great if your answers could be part of the responses on slido.com. So let's make this interactive. So again, how do I promote trust? Now, one of the things that perhaps we should start with is an understanding of what is trust. And for that, what I invite you to do is this. I invite you to answer our first poll on slido.com. And I do hope that you will answer this. So I'll activate it now. So the question here, or what you're asked to fill in really, and you can fill in multiple answers here, is to me, 1 to 3 signs of high trust are. Now, if you look at it, for those of you who are wondering, you can actually give more than 3 answers here. I'm asking for 1 to 3, just so you're not pressured to answer with a laundry list of answers. So what are 1 to 3 signs of high trust, be it in a person-to-person relationship, in a team, in a family? What are 1 to 3 signs of high trust? And for those of you who will be answering on slido.com, what I invite you to do is punch them in individually. So answer number 1, send or submit. Answer number 2, submit. Answer number 3, submit. So I do hope to see some answers pop up on the screen in a few seconds. I do understand there is a bit of a lag here. So I will wait, and I will wait to see some answers begin to come in on slido.com. So again, this is an active poll, and hopefully we'll have some thoughts, some opinions, some experiences come in. So in the journey or in the effort to define what trust is, let's start looking at what are signs of high trust in a relationship? What are signs of high trust in an organization, in a team, maybe even in a family, for those of you for whom that might be a more meaningful dimension to look at. So right now, I have 2 responses that I see on the screen. I hope all of you see them as well. So the first one would be communication. The next one would be openness. Another one, comfortable, or having a sense of comfort, right? So first, openness. People are open. Perhaps if I were to venture to define, maybe describe what this might be like, it might be a relationship or a context where people openly share their thoughts, their feelings with one another. So I see two relatively related answers: openness, open communication. I like this idea of not worried. So there's that sense of you're not worried about perhaps what people are saying about you. You're not worried about what people may be doing or not doing. Or maybe in the context of an organization or a business, you're not worried about whether things will get done or not. Of course, I'm reading into these answers here, but I do like what's coming in. So I'm reading off what's on the screen. First, high morale. So if we're looking at the team and organization, people in a high trust context will have high morale. They will feel good. They will feel energized. And I see another one, they'll feel engaged. So people will be highly engaged. And coming from Anna's session the last time, we defined high engagement as what? Having the willingness, in fact, having the desire to collaborate, to contribute creatively. To simplify that, it's really the willingness and the desire to go beyond just the job description and just what's asked of us. To give more, to invest more, willingly. Motivated, all caps. I like that. Thank you for sending that in. I like the implied energy and the feeling there. So motivated, high morale, relaxed. Again, it reminds me of that idea of not worried. We're relaxed because in a high trust environment, and we discussed this in one of our previous sessions on trust, we said that a high trust environment or an environment with strong trust is one that feels safe. So in a safe environment, we're not worried. We feel relaxed. We feel comfortable. So another one of you put it. Another one, so comfortable. Looks like it's a shared feeling here. So comfortable, relaxed, not worried. People feel safe. People feel like they don't have to have their guards up. Nice. Another one, transparency. Now, transparency, what does that tell us? And we'll discuss this a bit more in a while. Transparency is basically, if we were to define transparency first, literally, transparency is the quality of being clear of not obscuring. So if we're to take a piece of glass, for example, glass or plastic or any material that could be transparent, it's really the ability to transmit the light or the view as is almost, without any distortion, without any modification, without any obscuring. So transparency. So in a relationship, in a team, in an organization, that might mean the ability to see things as they are, without distortion, without modification, without any obscuring, without veils. So thank you for sharing that. Collaborative effort. Again, relating to that idea of engagement and motivation, which we touched on just a while ago. So collaborative effort, open communication, feelings of belongingness. Now, I like how this goes into that sense of having a feeling. We're not just talking about describing. We're not just describing how people are together. We're not just describing the situation. We're actually naming a feeling. And that's of, I feel like I belong. So the feelings of belongingness, again, perhaps relating to that idea of feeling safe, people feeling safe with one another. High morale, not worried, openness, open communication, which we saw earlier. Less supervision, I like that. And we're going to touch on that later on. In fact, we're going to touch on that again when we get to question number 2. But less supervision, basically, perhaps coming from this idea of that I can depend on this person. I don't need to use a word that is often used, that's been used for quite some time, micromanage. I don't need to look over every single thing. Constant resource person, I like that. So perhaps we're thinking of a relationship here that is person to person. And we're thinking of how constant resource person, if I were to perhaps understand this in my own words, it would be someone that I can depend on consistently. And I know that every time I go to this person, I can bank on this person. I can depend on this person to help me out, to give me something meaningful. Let me know, of course, if I'm getting that right. So if you need extended answers, feel free to enter those in the chat as well, if you'd like to. A few others, just before we move on from this poll. Relaxed, engaged employees, motivated, again, all caps. Work results reaches top management. I like that. So if I were to read into this and let me know if I'm getting this right, it's basically the results of everyone's work, not just the superstars, not just the people in authority or with high designations. Everyone's work results are seen by top management, seen, appreciated, ideally, and recognized by top management. Great. High trust, again, because in a high trust environment, credit is given where credit is due. And people don't have to clamber for, don't have to grab at the credit because it's going to be given to the people to whom it's due. Sense of honesty, communication, efficiency, and high productivity. So the last two that I read there, not to say that they're the least important, they're the last two on the screen here. Efficiency, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a little while. Efficiency. Really, if we were to define efficiency, if I were to define it from my own experience, my own reading as well, the simplest definition of efficiency I can think of would be to get as much done with as little as possible in terms of resources, perhaps in terms of time and cost, which for many businesses, many organizations is desirable. So thank you for bringing that up. High productivity, again, very related to efficiency. Not exactly the same, but high productivity would be, in our terms in Franklin Covey, and we've discussed this in a few other sessions, getting the most important things done to a high degree of quality, to a high degree or a high level of expertise. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. Very meaningful. And I think they've helped enrich the discussion already, because these were not in my notes, and I can share my script or my notes with you, my discussion notes with you. None of these were in my notes, but all of them are very meaningful. Now, to bring us back, again, the question is, how do I promote trust? And the reason I asked, to me, one of the 1 to 3 signs of high trust is because I feel that one of the best ways to define trust, rather than coming up with a textbook definition. Now, I just saw another reply come in. If I may not have seen it, I'm sorry, but thank you for sending that in. So openness, communication, comfortable, high morale, transparency, communication, belongingness, less supervision, resource person, dependability, work results reach top management, efficiency, relax. So again, we're talking here about what trust looks like. And that really was the intent of this question. What does trust look like to us? And that actually answers the question, where do we want to go? If you recall, when I started addressing this question, I said one of the questions would be, where are we starting from? What's the baseline? What's the context? Do we have distrust? Do we have no trust? Is it about me wanting to put forward a picture, an image, a perception of being trustworthy as an individual, as myself, perhaps as the leader of the team or the organization? Or is it about encouraging people to trust one another? So that would be the baseline. And that can differ from person to person, from family to family, from organization to organization. But I think the idea of where do we want to go is perhaps a more shared one. And I think that your answers here that you've shared, thank you to those who shared, your answers here that have been shared, paint a picture for us of where we want to go. What is trust? What is it that we want to promote? So, trust is having high transparency. Trust is where people are comfortable, are relaxed, where they don't feel like they need to be looking behind their backs, having their guards up. Why? Because they feel like they belong. Because they're not worried, because they're not anxious. Because they can trust that there's open communication, that credit will be shared, that credit will be given when it's due. And therefore, people are motivated. There's high morale in the team. We have engaged employees who don't need to be supervised as much. And where communication is done honestly, openly, and there's collaboration. Now, I think that paints a pretty clear picture for us. Now, of course, we can drill it down further. We can be even more specific. We can make it measurable, as even we in Franklin Covey say, is ideally done. But I think this paints a pretty clear picture. Now, perhaps the next question, and the one that attacks this more directly, this idea of how do I promote trust? Basically, how do I get there? So how do we get there? How do we get to that picture in our teams, in our organizations, in our families, even in our one-to-one relationships? Now, allow me please to ask you the next question. Now, the next question would be this. And this is really an invitation for you to reflect on. So I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, I hope you haven't logged off from slido.com. If you have, then I invite you to go back on, because we will be going through a number of questions here. Most likely we'll be going through around 4 questions here. So I invite you to stay on, if possible, in your devices. So the next question I'd like you to answer, and this is again in an effort to answer, how do we therefore get here? How do we get to this context, this picture of high trust that we just painted for ourselves? What I invite you to answer is this question. If we were to reflect on me first, so in my case, it's me as Paulo. In order for me to trust someone, I need. So I invite you to finish that statement and share your thoughts with us. Thank you. Thank you for the quick response there. So in order for me to trust someone, I need consistency. Now, we will actually talk about this a little more in just a little while. But consistency of behavior, consistency of the way things are done or not done. Perhaps even consistency of the way things are said or not said. Why? What makes consistency so important? Perhaps if I were to simplify it and use my own words, and do let me know, of course, if I'm capturing the feeling and the thoughts that you have here. Consistency spells out. Consistency gives very strong cues and clues towards a sense of authenticity and genuineness. So the next idea, which is shared by at least 2 people here, is honesty. So in order for me to trust someone, I need honesty. I need a sense of honesty, which would be what? For many people, or for most people, honesty would involve a number of things. Telling the truth, telling things as they are, not covering things up, being straight, talking in a straightforward manner, or relating to something that we saw in the first question, having a sense of transparency, having that sense of I can see the truth, I can verify the truth, I can see through the different structures, the systems, different situations, and see the truth underlying all of this. So a few other ideas have already come in. Thank you. I invite those of you who have just joined us perhaps, or those of you who are still silent, to log on to slido.com and share your thoughts with us. So honesty, and then transparency, as I mentioned earlier. So that sense of honesty or that behavior of being honest usually lends itself to establishing and putting forward or anchoring a situation where there is transparency. So consistency, honesty, transparency. In order for me to trust someone, I need results. Now look at that. The reason this is intriguing for me and the reason this is interesting is because results seem like they're very distant or very different from the first few ideas. Consistent, perhaps not consistency, but transparency and honesty, different. Here we're talking about results. So most likely we're talking about a business context, a team context here. Results. So in order for me to trust someone, it likely means this person needs to deliver results. And if I were to relate it to the very first idea we discussed, deliver results consistently. So the more that those results, ideally the right results, are delivered, and the more consistently that's done, the higher the level of trust, most likely. And we're going to touch on that in a little while. So if you notice, I keep saying that phrase because so many of these ideas that you're bringing up will actually be echoed later on. So please continue bringing them in. Please continue sharing your thoughts. So dynamics, dialogue, I like that. Dialogue. Now, if we were to just break that down, not even go to etymology, but just break it down, dialogue, it already implies, already suggests what it means, which is basically it's a conversation. It's a back and forth between at least two people. So it's not a one way. It's not like me talking to the camera now. It's more like this. I'd like to see this as a dialogue or a conversation among us. Now, of course, I can't hear your voices. That would be the ideal scenario for me to hear your voices through the camera, through my speakers, if I couldn't see you face to face. But this brings us closer. I feel like we're having a conversation here. You're sharing your thoughts with me. And yes, I'm sort of trying to read into because I've only given you so many characters. I've only given you a few questions to converse with me on. But this is dialogue. So basically, it's two ways. People sharing thoughts, sharing opinions, sharing their perspectives. Not just one person, not just the boss or not just the leader saying, this is what we believe, this is what we're going to do. Rather, it involves two ways. And what isn't mentioned there is really that act of listening. In order to have a true dialogue, there must be that sense of listening, asking the right questions. Listening for the answers, both what is said and what is unsaid. Now, in this case, I may not be doing it perfectly as there's a lot that I cannot read. I cannot read your nonverbals. I cannot ask follow-up questions individually. But what I'm trying to do here is trying to read what is unsaid, what goes underneath, or perhaps what goes beyond just these one-word answers that you're sharing here. I'm trying to understand what goes beyond that. So, results, consistency, keeping their promises. Right, yes. Keeping commitments, keeping promises. In fact, first, making those commitments and having the ability to keep them, to follow through on them. Again, when we have that sense of consistency, when we know and we see and we've experienced that someone can keep commitments, then we begin to trust them even more. The trust becomes, I no longer worry about whether this person is going to deliver, whether it's a commitment or result. I no longer feel like I need to watch over everything, manage everything, because I do know that this person is going to get things done, that this person will follow through on what they said they're going to do. Respect. Yes, and we're going to talk about that also in a little while. So respect between people, respect among people. That is very, very important. Open communication, dialogues, respect, track record, results, consistent keeping of commitments, clear intent. Nice. Clear intent. Now, this may sound like it's a bit abstract, but as we'll discuss in a little while, intent is very, very important because it serves as the motivation behind our actions, behind our behavior, the things we do and the things we don't do. And we're going to touch on that also in question number 2. He should give an F. So really, what we're talking about here, we're beginning to see again how the picture is beginning to broaden. I wouldn't say diverge, but rather we're beginning to see that the picture is in fact growing. What do I mean by that? Earlier, we painted the picture of what high trust would be. Here, we're beginning to answer the question, how do I promote it? By answering the question, how do we get there? If I were to look at myself, what do I need to trust other people? Now, why did I ask this question? Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And again, these have been very insightful. I love the range of ideas, and I like how everything comes together, whether you intended for it to happen that way or not. I do feel that everything comes together here. So we have honesty. Honesty is necessary. Sense of transparency, being able to see the truth, see things as they are and be able to verify them. Keeping promises, delivering results, having that sense of consistency and therefore a track record. Having clear intent, having a clear motivation, and having that motivation, which ideally would involve respecting other people, and also having a sense of dialogue, understanding, conversation, two-way at the very least, or in the sense of a team, perhaps it's multi-way, listening to everyone's needs, opinions, having open communication. Now, why did I ask this question? Why did I ask in order for me? If you notice, it's me, it's an individual, to trust someone I need. It's because I personally feel one of the best ways to understand how we can promote trust and build trust is to understand how we ourselves approach trust. What do I need in order to trust someone? So therefore, that will help us begin to understand at the very least what it might take for other people to trust us or for other people to trust one another. Sure, the picture will not be complete. Each of us will have our blind spots. Each of us will have our preferences and biases towards certain things. But it will give us a good starting point. Because if we can answer the question, what does it take for me to trust someone? Then it gives us a good starting point, an idea at least. And if the question is, how do I influence people or encourage people to trust me? Then perhaps we can look at ourselves and ask, if I were to judge myself by my own standards, like if we say I require honesty from people, do we give honesty? Do we behave honestly? Do we speak honestly? Do we have that sense of transparency in our relationships and our dealings? Because if the answer is no, then it gives you an idea why perhaps there might be no trust or low trust in the current context. So again, it's not a complete picture, but it's a very good starting point. And really one of my favorite rules is the golden rule. Do unto others first, as you would have them do unto you. So if you'd like to promote trust for yourselves or within your team, understand what it is and what it takes to have trust from you. Now, very briefly, I will ask you to allow me to go into a short lecture here. Now, I won't take very long because we've actually tackled this already in our previous session. So for those of you who perhaps were not able to catch them, I invite you to go through our video catalog on our Facebook page when this session is done and look at our sessions on trust. We've actually done quite a number of sessions on trust. And I will just touch on some of the ideas that we had there, just to expound a little bit more on the answers that you have on the screen. And I'll share with you first, I'll start with what we call the 5 waves of trust. Now, the only reason I'm starting with the 5 waves of trust is because I feel it gives us a good idea of how trust is built. So what are the 5 waves of trust? I'll focus on 2, but the 5 waves of trust are, first, self-trust. What is self-trust? Self-trust is the ability to establish a sense of credibility. To lengthen that a bit, self-trust is our level of confidence, or the confidence that we have to be worthy of trust. First, to ourselves and from ourselves, and then second, to ourselves and from others. And what does that involve? It involves establishing and building up that credibility, which really involves inviting and giving people, first ourselves, then others, that sense, that comfort, as one of you put it earlier, to believe in us. So that's self-trust. We're going to expound on that very, very briefly in a little while. The next wave is relationship trust. What's relationship trust? Relationship trust is built on consistency. Consistency of behavior towards other people, in our dealings, in our relationships with other people. Now, what does it really do? It builds the level of trust, or what we call our trust accounts with other people. Now, those are the 2 waves of trust that we'll be focusing on. I'll just go through the other 3 very, very quickly before focusing on these 2. So the 3rd wave of trust is organizational trust. So you'll notice here that the trend is it's moving outwards in larger and larger ripples. So first is self-trust, then relationship trust, and then organizational trust. So if you notice, it goes beyond just us and our direct relationships. It goes towards the bigger organization, bigger teams, other people. And then there's market trust, which can deal with things like brand, which can deal with our image as a company, as a brand. And then finally, there's societal trust, which is really almost universal or global, our impact on the community, on society. Now, I won't focus on the last three, as I feel most of the questions that we're addressing this afternoon are actually addressable in the first two waves of trust. So self-trust, as we said, it's building credibility, that confidence of being worthy of trust to and from ourselves, and then to and from other people, credibility or belief. And as we discussed in our previous trust sessions, there are four cores of trust, which go under two C's, character and competence. The first two under character are integrity and intent. Again, as we said in our sessions, integrity is about sense of wholeness. Wholeness in terms of congruence between what we say and what we do. What we say is important to us, what our values are, and the way we behave. Intent being our motivations. Speaking of our underlying motivations, our agendas. Do we look towards just our own good, what's in it for me, and that's all? Or do we look at the greater good? Do we look at the good of other people? That's the first C, character, integrity, and intent. And then competence has to do with our capabilities, our skills, our proficiency, our ability to get things done, deliver results, as a number of you already mentioned. And results. So capability are the skills that are required, and then the results. It's the output or the outcome of those skills applied. Now, results, as a number of you mentioned, also has to do with the track record, because results can be past results, therefore establishing our reputation, our track record. Current results, are we able to deliver the same or better results now as context and situations change? And can we sustain that ability, or can we even better it as we move forward? Now, I'll focus on just integrity and intent for now. Integrity, as we said, congruence and wholeness between what we say we're going to do, what we stand for, and the way we behave and what we do. We've already touched on the second one, which is intent. And I think we're getting ahead here a bit and already partially answering the second question, which is great, because we don't need to repeat things when we get there. So intent, having that motivation, which goes beyond just me. Why is it important to go beyond just me? Because in trust, it's not just about me. In trust, we're automatically talking about relationships. While it starts with ourselves, the true value of trust comes out when it impacts and in the way it impacts our relationships with other people. And therefore, if our intent solely looks at us and centers only on our benefit, our desires, then it's going to be very difficult to win the trust and build trust from other people. Because why are they going to trust us if we're not interested in their own interests and their own good? Now, relationship trust, consistent practice. Now, as I mentioned, we've had other sessions on this. Again, I won't repeat those sessions, but there are 13 behaviors that we've found to build trust, especially relationship trust. Now, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on a select few behaviors because I feel they can answer the question of how can I promote trust rather clearly. Not to say that these are the most important of the 13 behaviors, but they also echo many of the thoughts that you yourselves have already shared with us through slido.com. So the first way I'm going to build this up is by saying that one of the best ways to build relationship trust or trust from other people or in our relationships with other people, whether it's one-to-one or with our teams, our direct reports, or the organizations we work in, or even our families, is first to have a genuine effort to connect. Have a genuine, or in today's parlance language, authentic relationship. Now, what does that mean? I will highlight a number of the 13 behaviors here because I feel these behaviors can really build an authentic relationship. Now, the first one is to demonstrate respect. Now, what do we mean by demonstrate respect? What we mean by demonstrating respect is about having genuine concern and care for others, showing them that we care, respecting their dignity as people. In fact, I will go further than that and say it's about respecting them as equals. Yes, they may be our direct reports, or let's say in the case of a family, they may be our children, but they are equals in the sense of their rights, perhaps even their freedoms. Respect that. And why is that important? Because as we said earlier, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if you would like them to respect you, respect your freedoms, respect your rights, respect your interests, then it only makes sense that we respect theirs. So demonstrate respect towards other people. If we're the leaders and if we're the bosses, if we're the managers, then yes, perhaps there will be times, or perhaps even as parents, there will be times where we will need to have the final say, where we will need to make decisions that represent them. Now, what matters here is that we take into account and we respect and recognize their needs and opinions, even if and when those decisions may not completely align or agree with what our direct reports or family members may want. As long as they feel like they've been heard, they've been respected, they've been dignified in terms of their position, then that usually counts towards building respect. Will they always be absolutely happy? Perhaps not. But respect will be built and trust will be built as well. What's another one? Talk straight. What do we mean by talking straight? Basically, it's being honest, something that quite a number of you have already pointed out. Telling the truth. Now, it relates very, very closely to transparency because in transparency, we talk about telling the truth in a manner that is verifiable. Telling the truth in a manner that doesn't hide things, that doesn't shroud things, or that doesn't fudge things up the way, let's say, Sunday would have fudge covering the white soft serve. Telling the truth and serving it up in a way that shows you a clear picture where people don't have to dig through and dig beneath the surface to see what really is. Talking straight, creating transparency. And perhaps one of the most important, and Anna has spent quite some time discussing this in her previous session, so I'll just mention it here and not go any further, listening first. Listening to understand other people. If we were to apply these, and I'll even go backwards on them, listen first, demonstrate respect, talk straight, create transparency. If we apply these, then I can tell you that we'll be able to establish genuine connections, genuine relationships. And that is perhaps the most important step to promoting trust, whether it's towards us or among people. What's the next one? So connect with people, be bankable. What do I mean by be bankable? Few of the things you've already mentioned. Be able to consistently deliver results. Consistently keep commitments. Why is this so important? Because in establishing credibility with other people, and therefore in building our trust accounts with them, in our relationships with them, consistency becomes our currency. Consistency leads to a sense of belief, a sense of perhaps comfort, less worry, feeling less of the need, or in fact none of the need to check on and redo work already done. So be bankable. In order to be bankable, what does it require? Keep commitments, deliver results. In addition to those two, practice accountability. Own up. Own up to things both done and not done. Recognize, and this touches on Menen's session. So as I mentioned earlier, it really brings all of these sessions together. Practice accountability by owning up, recognizing what is mine, what is my accountability, what am I responsible for, whether done or not done. And perhaps just as important, in practicing accountability, clarify expectations. What do we mean by that? Clarify what's expected of us. Clarify what we're accountable for. Now, to bring it back to a few of the things you mentioned, clarify what are the results that are expected of me. Clarify the commitments that I'm going to be held accountable for. What are those commitments? What are you expecting of me? And when we're able to deliver on those, it establishes that sense of bankability. Now, hopefully, that's allowed us to have a clear picture of how we might be able to promote trust, whether it's towards ourselves or in a team or a family. So basically, it's understanding first, what does it take for me to trust other people? And in understanding that, first ask the question, am I doing the same? Am I behaving in a way that would allow me to trust myself? Again, the golden rule, mirroring ourselves first. And then beyond that, also understanding that there are those four cores, as we said, of credibility. Character, which are integrity and intent, which made up rather of integrity and intent. Competence, capability, and results. Echoing quite a number of things that you already said. Establish genuine relationships by reaching out to people, listening to people, understanding their desires, their needs, their situations, their experiences, demonstrating respect towards them, even when we don't agree with them, perhaps especially when we don't agree with them. When their experiences may not be our own, demonstrate respect by understanding them, by dignifying their experiences and not belittling them. Not saying, oh, that's nothing to worry about. Wala lang yan. Or one of the things we like saying, wala ka sa akin, eh ako nga ganito eh. If you listen to ourselves, we're basically saying, mine is more important. Mine has more magnitude. Or you think you're having a hard time? Think of me. In effect, we're belittling their experience. We're belittling what's important to them. So avoid that. Respect and dignify what's important to them. Respect what is true and real to them. And talk straight. Be transparent. Be honest. Be truthful. Tell the story in a way that is verifiable. Be bankable. Clarify expectations and be accountable for the expectations. And consistently keep commitments and deliver results. I hope that's addressed question 1. Now let's address question 2. As I mentioned quite a few times, many of the concepts and the principles that we've already tackled in question 1 will apply to question 2. And that's why we've spent quite a bit of time on question 1, because I feel that both in terms of the breadth of the question, as well as the principles and behaviors that will be required to address that, we've actually touched on them already. So question number 2, how can I stay firm in trusting others' intentions and not concluding that mistakes are because of bad judgment? So again, just as an aside, I invite you to keep slido.com on. So while the current poll is no longer related to this question directly, and therefore I will pause it for now, what I invite you to do, I will bring it up again in a little while. Now, sorry, there is a Q&A which was brought up, so I will address that first. Management told us not to discuss layoffs with our teams before it happened. Now, I think my team doesn't trust me. What can I do? That's a very good question. Now, okay, I'm sorry, I just noticed this here now. But so I'll address it here. So management told us not to discuss layoffs with our teams before it happened. Now, I think my team doesn't trust me. What can I do? There are a few things that need clarification here, and this may take some time. But so if I were to imagine, news has probably gotten out about the layoffs, because otherwise I don't see why the team wouldn't trust you. I think, okay, I'm a bit conflicted here in terms of whether to discuss it in the sense of what could have been done or what we can do now. But since your answer is, what can I do? One of the things that you could do here would be this. So, and this again is my personal take on this. So management told us not to discuss layoffs with our teams before it happened. Team doesn't trust me, likely because the layoffs have happened or at least been announced already, or there's been news about it. And now the trust seems to have been eroded. First thing you could do would be to understand the motivations, the reasons, and while they may seem obvious, one of the things you could do is try to understand, perhaps from your own supervisor, your own manager, your own leader, what were the reasons behind not wanting to discuss layoffs? Now, again, many of the answers may seem obvious, but it would be good for you and for anyone in this position to understand, where was the organization coming from? What were the considerations? Now, why is this important? Because it gives you a starting point for understanding. It's not necessarily to say that you will lay everything on the table and say, alam nyo, ito yung dahilan. These are the reasons why I didn't discuss them. But it may help to give you an idea of where the organization was. So for example, it might be that there were certain sensitive personal issues that were involved. And therefore, the feeling might have been, or the thinking might have been, discussing layoffs already might have led to uncovering these sensitive personal topics. So perhaps something like that may give light to why there was reason behind it. Another one might be this. And whether or not you get clear answers when you ask that question, I think the general recommendation I would give would be to sit down with your team. Now, depending on the size of your team, you may decide to do this en banc, meaning everything, or you may decide to do this either individually or in smaller chunks or smaller groups. Basically, have a sit down with them and have a temperature check. Now, my recommendation would be at the very beginning, or even as you set these meetings with them, lay out your intent. And perhaps the intent might be to understand where everyone is, to discuss the feelings they have towards each other, towards you, to understand whether they trust you and where that's coming from or not coming from. Now, this is potentially going to be a difficult or challenging conversation. But the reason I recommend this is because it gives you a clear baseline to start from. And as long as you have the genuine and pure intent to rebuild the relationship and that trust, I think that this is going to be a good starting point. Why? Because it allows all of you the opportunity to talk straight and be transparent with one another, at least about your situation. There might be some things that you still can't be transparent on. Like if your own managers, your own leaders told you, absolutely do not discuss these 1 to 5. My recommendation would not be to transgress that. Like if it's an absolute rule, do not discuss this with your team, then find ways to understand your situation and perhaps ask this question: what can I do to rebuild your trust? One of the things I would advise that you don't do is to point fingers. Again, this goes back to Menen's session. Don't point fingers and say, you know what, because top management told me not to do this. Yes, that may be the truth. But ask yourself, what is the value? If it simply is to shift blame and say it's not my fault, then perhaps there's a better way. Perhaps it's more productive, or it would be more productive to have that conversation and ask, what can I do? You might go as far as saying, there are some things in my position that I could not and still cannot discuss with you. And unfortunately, that is not entirely up to me, which is the truth. Because you may be bound by certain contractual obligations, you may be bound by your own responsibility. So you can lay that out and go that far and say, but I would like to understand, what can I do within my power? What can I do in my own situation to rebuild the trust with you? And that would be a good starting point. And I think it would be good to open that question and keep it open rather than giving them choices. Like, gusto nyo ba ito yung gawin ko? Do you want me to do this? Rather than giving them a multiple choice, allow them to share. So in that sense, it might be good to do this in smaller groups if your team is a big one. So I hope that helps. Do let me know if you have follow-on questions. You can do it here in the Q&A or in the chat. I hope you don't mind if we go to the next question. Okay, so the next question is this. The next question, and this will go a bit quicker than question number 1, as we've already tackled many of the fundamental answers and principles in question number 1. How can I stay firm in trusting others' intentions and not concluding or not assuming that it stems from bad judgment? Now, you will see the Q&A on the screen. If you have any other Q&As, do feel free to put them up. Otherwise, I will bring up another poll very, very briefly, in a very short time, rather. Now, the first thing I'd recommend is to break this question down and dissect it. So first is understand again, where is this coming from? Similar to question number 1. And if we were to look at the question, the feeling I get personally is that there is a bias towards not trusting in this relationship or in this context. There can be various reasons for that. Perhaps it's a lack of consistency, perhaps results were not delivered, perhaps it's simply just not being trusting towards these people. Now, whatever that may be, it would be important for us to understand, where is the relationship? Where is the context right now? Because again, to me, it feels like there is that bias towards not trusting, or in fact, assuming that there are certain things going on, because the question itself says that. How can I stay firm in trusting others' intentions and not concluding? So the implication to me is that there is that tendency to conclude. So at what level, a few other questions you might want to ask yourselves, at what level is the propensity to trust? How likely am I to trust this person or these people in this situation or in this relationship? And have an honest answer towards that. I encourage you to go beyond the safe answer of, kaya ko naman silang pagtiwalaan, or I can trust them. I can trust them actually. Have a clear answer. If you were asked right now, trust, not trust, where would you go? And I know that it isn't necessarily black and white, but if you're asked that question, trust, not trust, and you only had those two, where are you more likely to go in this relationship or in this situation? And then next, how defined or how clear to you, the one asking the question, are the factors of trust or distrust in this relationship? Meaning, allow me to clarify a bit. How clearly do we understand why there seems to be this tendency to conclude that maybe I don't trust this person or I don't trust this person's intentions? Where is this coming from? Is there some past experience, perhaps? What was that past experience, if that is so? So a few questions that I feel would be a good way to set the baseline and understand where is this right now. Now, the second part of my answer is this. The second part is to understand and to clearly see that there are two parts to this question. The first one is about intent, questioning, perhaps being unsure of others' intentions. And then the second one is about bad judgment, or if I were to paraphrase it, perhaps decision-making or decision-making capability. And those two are very different. They may be related to one another, but they are separate. What do I mean by that? Intent does not necessarily lead automatically to good judgment or good decisions. And the opposite is true as well. Just because someone makes bad decisions or doesn't choose wisely doesn't mean that their intent was necessarily malicious. Because intent, as we said earlier, is about motivation. If I were to paraphrase it, break it down a bit, when we talk about intent, we talk about motivations. What is the core interest at play? Is it about my own interest? Therefore, if we're to look at this relationship here, are we thinking that this person has selfish interests? Do we know that this person has selfish interests? Has he or she spelled that out before? Or have we found that out before, somehow, with certainty? Motivations. Desired outcomes. When we talk about intent, again, we talk about desired outcomes or agenda. Where do we want to go? Where does this person want to go? What is the desired outcome or result of this person's behavior? Now, has this person declared this intent? I'll leave that question here for a moment. Has this person declared his or her intent? And do we therefore know it? So I mentioned that there are two parts. First is intent. And we said that intent is motivation, agenda, desired outcome, desired results. The second part of the question is about judgment. Or, as the questionnaire puts it, as the questioner, the one asking the question puts it, bad judgment. Therefore, decision-making or bad decision-making. Now, when we talk about judgment, we're talking about choice. We're talking about perhaps action or choice leading to action. And in truth, one's decision-making and one's action that results from those decisions likely is based on a multitude of factors. Only one of those factors would be intent. What do I mean by that? This is the result that I want. This is my underlying motivation. I actually want the best for this team. I genuinely care for this team. Or I genuinely care for this person. I want the best for him or her. I really want to help him or her. What is my desired outcome? To help her, to help him. If we were to try to be a bit more specific, I'd really like to help him get this project done or achieve this goal, maybe a sales goal or closing an account, for example. So that's the intent. Now, there are other factors that come into play. What do I know about this project? What do I know about this account? What are my capabilities? What will my schedule allow? What will my own considerations, especially, to use the cliche, in this new normal, what will my own considerations, my own priorities, my own capabilities and resources now allow? So there are many other factors that go into decision-making and therefore judgments. And then lastly, one's judgments may be hampered by, and are likely hampered by, blind spots. Now, how do we bring this back to the question? How do I bring this back to the question? The first answer I would give is this. How can I stay firm in trusting others' intentions? The simplest answer I can give to that is make that decision. To make the decision that we want to trust others' intentions, and therefore we want to trust their character. Now, of course, there are factors that come into play. in Franklin Covey and in The Speed of Trust, which is where I'm taking and I'm borrowing most of the principles and concepts here from. The Speed of Trust, we talk about smart trust, which takes into account two axes. The first axis, the vertical axis, is one which I already alluded to a while ago. The vertical axis is propensity to trust. How likely am I to trust? Am I less likely to trust, and therefore I'm more likely to doubt someone? Or am I highly likely to trust, the upper level? Do I have a great tendency to trust people without necessarily asking too many questions, without necessarily needing proof, so to speak? So propensity to trust, vertical. The horizontal axis is the level of analysis. How much do we analyze the situation, the context, the person, and his or her track record, his or her 4 cores of credibility before we decide to trust them? Now, there are 4 quadrants that we can identify here, and I won't go into the greatest detail, but really, smart trust or trusting with a good sense really involves high propensity to trust. And this may sound peculiar and this may sound intriguing to many of you, so I will talk about it in a little while. Having a high propensity and therefore having that desire, having that tendency to trust people, and combining it with a high level of analysis. What does that mean? High level of thinking, high level of dissecting the situation, high level of looking at the person. Now, this doesn't mean giving out trust right away. High level or high propensity of trust doesn't mean totally trusting the person, but rather it could mean giving trust to the person and giving it in a way that is perhaps conditioned on, let's say, results, conditioned on certain commitments, conditioned on certain deliverables early on maybe, or conditioned on even certain behaviors like updating me consistently or communicating clearly, not keeping things from me. So we give trust, but at the same time, maybe because of track record, maybe because of the way we've experienced that person or past experiences with that person, we'd like certain things to be in place, certain safeguards maybe, so that we feel safe ourselves. So high propensity to trust with high analysis, high recognition of the factors at play in the situation. So again, how can I stay firm in trusting others' intentions? Have that propensity to trust, and going back to something I mentioned earlier, perhaps we'd like to ask them, what are your intentions? What are your honest intentions in this situation? You might even go further. What are your motivations? What outcomes are you looking at? What outcomes to you would be the most ideal in this situation? And that really helps to paint a picture of one's motivations, one's intentions. And then I'll take the second part of the question. Not conclude that mistakes are because of bad judgment. Mistakes can very well be because of bad judgment, but that doesn't mean that the person has bad or malicious intent. It may in fact mean that the person was not equipped to make the right decisions, to make the right or wise judgments. Perhaps the person had blind spots. Perhaps the person did not have the right technical skills. Perhaps the person did not have the resources, including time. Time is a big factor. Perhaps the person did not have the right amount of time for him or her to actually make the right decision. Maybe the pressure of the situation and the time caused them to make a bad judgment call. But again, that doesn't mean that their intention was bad or malicious. So at the end of the day, if really all we want to understand is how can I have the ability to stay firm in trusting others' intentions, my recommendation would be to look at ourselves first and ask, where am I? Do I have a low propensity or high propensity to trust this person? Am I already doubting this person from the get-go? Am I already assuming that they have malicious intent? Or do I have a high propensity to trust? Am I willing to trust them? And do I combine that with analysis? The analysis of what perhaps led them to make bad decisions in the past? What perhaps led them to make certain mistakes in the past? The last thing I would mention, this may sound rather funny perhaps, is that we all make mistakes. And those mistakes may be born of the best of intentions. They may also be the result of the most thought out, the most carefully thought out actions. And perhaps the factors just didn't come to play for that person. So I feel that that in itself is an answer to this question, but I will go a bit further. I'll ask this question and I'll leave it at your answers. So I have one more poll coming up here, and I hope that you will answer these. Again, it's another word cloud. So the poll question is this: in my experience, the costs or the impact of low or no trust in a relationship, in an organization, in a team are when the trust is low, when there is no trust, when there is distrust or mistrust. What's the impact? What behaviors? What results do we see? What output do we see? What kind of relationships do we see? What's the energy that we feel? Please share your thoughts, those of you who are still with us. And it would be interesting just to see that. I won't prolong that discussion there. Okay, red tape. Now, just while we're waiting for the others, that alone already says red tape and with an exclamation mark. So you can tell there's some emotion there. But if I were to extend that a bit, red tape, bureaucracy leads to certain things, inefficiency. Things not getting done, or at least not getting done within the ideal time frame or the least amount of time. Not just time, but even cost. Because even if it takes, let's say, going through a number of people, effectively what we're saying is a number of people have had to spend time on that. And that can result not just in time cost, but even in opportunity cost. Perhaps business opportunities not taken because we were waiting for certain decisions, red tape. Low engagement, why? Because when people don't feel trusted, how do you think that feels? If you were to think of an important relationship to you, where you don't feel trusted, but you dearly, dearly want that person to trust you, what does it feel like? Is it energizing? Is it inspiring? I don't think so. But you're free to share your thoughts, of course. Low engagement, red tape, stress, absolutely. Stress on both people, if I would venture to guess. Stress on me as the person who doesn't trust. Why? Because I'm anxious. Because I don't feel like I'm depending on this person. Because I feel like I have to redo work, maybe. And then stress on the other person because they may very well be, again, they may very well have the best of intentions. And yet they feel like they're not being trusted and they don't get it. If I were to put myself in that person's shoes, it might be, all I want is the best. I just want to help my boss, my leader. And yet he or she is micromanaging me. I don't get it. He or she doesn't trust me. And that stresses people out and eventually leads to low engagement. Unhealthy relationships, absolutely. No progress, resentment, slow progress, more errors, unhealthy relationships, waste of time, missed opportunities, energy vampires. Lovely way to put it. Of course, not a lovely experience, but a lovely way to put it. Lack of ownership and blame. Again, I will refer you to Menen's session. And in fact, one of the ways that Menen started that session was to ask, how does it feel to blame someone? How does it feel to be blamed? And I invite you to view even just those few minutes, just to get an idea for the feeling there, or just ask yourself those two questions. How does it feel to blame someone? How does it feel to be blamed? Now, I mentioned I'm not going to expound on this, but I think the picture that we're seeing here is not a very good one. So the reason I asked this in relation to question number 2 is because if we have a low propensity to trust, if we find ourselves realizing that we have a low propensity to trust, therefore we almost automatically doubt the people we work with. We question their motivations simply because maybe they weren't able to deliver the results that we expected in the first place. We may be painting a picture like this in our family, in our organization, in our teams. We may be stressing people out that we actually care for, or that we actually need. We may be building resentment towards us because we don't trust people. So again, I won't dwell on this much longer, both because of time and because I think the picture is pretty clear. This is not the picture we want, I think. And the last one I see here, people not feeling valued. That definitely is not something that we want. And that leads me to question number 3. Now, question number 3 is this. How do I promote interdependence and avoid the silo trap? Now, this is the one that I will spend the least amount of time on, not because it's the least important. In fact, I think this is the fruit of the first 2 questions. promoting trust, effectively promoting trust, and also managing to trust others' intentions and therefore trust them and not conclude or not assume that they have bad intentions or that they don't know how to do the right things. How do I promote interdependence and avoid the silo trap? First, let's understand what is interdependence. If I were to spell it out in my own words, I would say that interdependence is a situation, a context where people and teams work together, where they collaborate with one another, where ideas, perspectives, and efforts come together. And true interdependence is one where people don't necessarily need to agree. In fact, if you were to ask me, interdependence can only happen when people are allowed to disagree. When people are allowed to have different ideas, different perspectives, different work styles, different strengths, different capabilities, different levels of capability, and where people are allowed to bring in their own contributions without everyone having to do the same thing. That is both necessary and that's also the beauty of interdependence because it allows for a picture, a bigger picture to be painted where there are more contributions, where more value is made and created, and where people actually feel more valued, which is why I said that segues very, very smoothly and very nicely into question number 3. Now, just so that we're able to paint a picture again for ourselves, I invite you to answer one last poll this afternoon. So I hope you will indulge me here and answer this last poll question that I'm bringing up here. And the poll question or the poll statement that I'd like you to complete is this. In my experience, the benefits of working together effectively are. Now, I invite you to view this in any context that you feel is most ideal or most relevant to you. Might be in the context of your team, your organization, your company, might be even the context of your family. So you might want to look at it as the benefits of working together, the benefits of relating effectively together, the benefits of having harmonious relationships, having collaborative, maybe not harmonious necessarily, because that may bring us to a situation where we feel like we can't have disagreements, but working and collaborating with one another are. What are the benefits in your experience? And as you're sharing your thoughts there, I'll wait for a few thoughts to come out. I'll also look in as there is a question. So first, in someone's experience, the benefits of working together effectively are faster, better results. Now notice there are 2 words there. Faster, things done more quickly, more efficiently, better results. Why? Because sometimes maybe there are blind spots. Sometimes there are ideas, there are things, there are results that maybe we would not have been capable of delivering, coming up with alone. And perhaps it's the left field ideas that allow us to just bring in that extra shimmer, that extra value that makes it a much better result. Thank you for sharing that. Better ideas, yes, because again, one of the things that my generation, Gen X, liked saying a lot was think out of the box. Nowadays, I think some people say, where's the box? But really, better ideas, because ideas that come out of the thinking of different people, multiple people with different ideas, different experiences, really results in a more complete picture, better ideas with likely less blind spots. What idea can I share with you? Nowadays, there's a lot of technology. And one of the better ideas that's coming in with technology is this idea of, arguably, some people may agree, some people may disagree, hybrid technology, where you have electric technology merging with perhaps the more primitive fuel-based technology for propulsion. Now, why is that a better idea? Because in a sense, it helps address some of the concerns that have been brought about by fossil fuels, and yet it also allows us to have more efficient, faster vehicles in some ways. So better ideas, you work harder without counting the cost and the output is better. I like that idea. Because when we collaborate with other people and we do it effectively, in Franklin Covey, we have this term, synergize. When there is synergy, we work harder, which might mean we actually get tired physically because we expend energy, but we don't count the cost because to us, we actually enjoy it. It's something that energizes us in the long run. And by energizing, it does so in many levels. It gives a sense of fulfillment. It allows us to feel like the contributions, the efforts we're putting in are actually meaningful and valuable. And they aren't simply to check off boxes in our job description or maybe in our assessments, but rather they bring true value. So we don't count the cost. We don't count the hours. We don't say, I've done 1 hour and 13 minutes of overtime. But rather, we don't think about it. That's not to say that counting the hours of overtime is not correct. In some cases, it might be, just to be fair, but that's not the motivation. And it only comes as a result. So work harder without counting the cost, and the output is better. And I dare say, probably more fulfilling. Comfortable, easy, open, encouraging environment. And again, high energy. One of the questions I like asking personally when I run or when I facilitate the 7 habits for clients is, what does it feel like? Because you know you're in synergy when you don't feel like this, but rather when you feel like, yeah, let's get this done. It's tough, I have no idea how to do it, but let's get it done. That's the energy you're looking for. We need everyone to pitch in. It may be daunting, but it's exciting. The energy is high, it's motivated. Spirits are high. People actually want to work together. And when we hear ideas that may not agree with ours, we welcome them because they bring new insights. They open our perspectives. People being able to share their talents, strengths, and intelligence. I like that because one of the things we need to recognize is that each of us is the best at different things. So we may feel like we're the best at certain things. Some people may feel like, I'm the smartest. I have the most experience in blank. That may be true, but there are people who are better in certain things, perhaps certain dimensions even of your expertise, or other areas of expertise. And when you put those two together, rather than competing with one another, imagine the results. Imagine the possibilities. So when people are able to share and contribute their talents, their strengths, their intelligence, imagine the results that would be possible. Happier, stronger team, excellent results in a healthy working environment. Now, why did I ask that question? Thank you, all of you, for sharing your thoughts. Why did I ask that question? Because I feel like one of the best ways to promote interdependence and avoid the silo trap is to imagine this and to understand that if and when we manage to bring ourselves to a situation, a context, and establish that organization and that dynamic where people can be and are interdependent with one another, then this is what we have. That in itself may be motivation. Now, what are the steps we can take to promote interdependence? I actually invite you to look back at question number 1. How do we promote trust? Because interdependence, in order to have interdependence, we must be able to trust one another. People need to be able to trust us. And one of the things that I haven't mentioned, but is absolutely important when it comes to the question of trust, is we must know how to trust other people. And that is absolutely important. What do I mean by that? We cannot expect other people to trust us if we don't know how to trust other people. In fact, that in itself is one of the 13 behaviors of high trust. Extending trust is the way we put it at Franklin Covey. And what do we mean by that? We mean something that I mentioned in question number 2, have the propensity to trust. Have that bias and that desire to trust other people. Extend trust, especially when it has been earned. And if the person is only earning your trust, then make it clear that there is that desire. I want to trust you. I want to be able to bank on you. I want to bank on you. And if there are certain expectations, these are my expectations. I simply want you to have an open conversation with me. That's all I ask. Or I just need you to deliver these 1, 2, 3 reasonable results and make those results clear. And that will allow me just to open that door to trust. Now, why is that so important? Because imagine what it feels like. I already asked this question earlier. What does it feel like when you're not trusted? So if we as the leaders especially don't know how to trust, imagine first the example that sets. Boss doesn't trust this person. Why should I trust you? Or, boss is so doubtful of everyone. Perhaps that's the best way to do things. Kailangan sigurado tayo lagi. We have to watch our backs. We have to make sure, secure myself first. Imagine the example it sets. At the same time, imagine the energy that it gives other people. The stress, the anxiety, maybe even the resentment, because they're pouring their hearts, their minds, even their efforts into it, and they don't feel trusted. So one of the most important things in promoting a culture of interdependence is, first, promoting trust, and as part of that, knowing how to trust ourselves. Set that example, set that energy free, and open the door to trust. And then finally, go to this. Imagine what it would be like, and understand, not just imagine, but rather understand what it would be like if people were interdependent and trusted one another. Across teams, across borders, across functions. You would have people being heard, people feeling valued. You would have a stronger team, people working together, not just in silos, not just in their specializations, but across specializations. You would have people from all levels, all walks of life, all areas of expertise, being able to contribute value through their own talents, their own strengths, their own levels of intelligence, without needing to feel like they need to compete and compare themselves with other people. Because we all bring different dimensions, different qualities of value to the table. And everyone would work harder, feel more energized, inspired, fulfilled, without feeling the need to count the cost. And at the end of the day, would have faster, better, more inspiring, more effective results. Now it's 6 o'clock. I hope that this session has been meaningful for you. There is one question in the Q&A, so I'll just spend some time on that. It seems like a very specific one. So how can we use KPIs to foster trust rather than mistrust or going rogue, out for myself behavior? Okay. First, thank you for bringing this up. And I think this is important because KPIs are a reality that we will all need to deal with, at least in the professional sense. I do know that there are some families, some people who have KPIs as well in their personal lives. It isn't as common. So let's imagine for now it's on the professional side. So KPIs are important because of a number of things. It allows for measurable results. It also enables corporations, organizations to calibrate compensation, for example, reward. It also gives people, perhaps most importantly, clear goals to work for. So how can we use KPIs to foster trust rather than mistrust or going rogue? The first one I would say is because KPIs, key performance indicators, or for most people, what are their deliverables? Therefore, the first one would be to be clear as possible on what those deliverables are. Don't be broad. Don't give umbrella terms. And I know sometimes that's tempting. I've been guilty of that myself, both as an individual contributor and as a manager. It's tempting because it's easy, because we don't have to think through things, because it gives us flexibility, because it doesn't feel like we're nailing ourselves down on one thing that we may not deliver. But clarity of expectations and results expected gives people, gives contributors, gives team members something clear to go after. And at the same time, it gives people a sense of objectiveness. It's clear whether they met it or not at the end of the term, at the end of the cycle. So first is clarity of expectations. Next, I would say is have fairness when it comes to assessing KPIs. Now, this is my own personal opinion. For example, if we had KPIs that we had in place and we set last year, before the pandemic hit. Now, obviously, for most businesses, most individual contributors, maybe different for some, but for most, they likely did not hit those KPIs. Now, does that mean we completely excuse them and say, okay, there's nothing deliverable? Maybe not. But perhaps we can ask the question, how can we translate those KPIs? Or what contribution could have been made or what contribution was made in place of those KPIs? Now, to bring it back, first, make them clear, make them measurable, make them fair. Now, the next one I would say is make those KPIs relevant to the context and the situation. Don't ask people to deliver on things that are not important. Don't ask people to deliver on things that perhaps cannot be delivered or take superhuman effort to deliver. One of the concepts I discussed in one of the sessions long ago, a few months ago, was the idea of giving people stretch goals, but not stretching them so much that it feels like they're being overwhelmed. Give them a stretch goal that goes just beyond that envelope of, yes, I can get this done. Pushes them a little beyond, just to punch through that surface, rather than having them reach high and then feel like, oh, there's no way I'm reaching that. Give them something that just goes beyond what they might believe they can currently reach. So it's not about what they've been able to achieve currently, but what they believe they can currently reach. Give them something that just punches beyond that in order to stretch them. So make them clear, make them measurable, make them fair, make them relevant to the current context, the current situation. Therefore, make them realistic as well. And if we want to stretch them, make that stretch reasonable and realistic. Make that stretch motivating rather than demotivating and disengaging. I think those steps alone will help promote trust, or at least avoid mistrust. Usually, out for myself behavior, I think, takes place or comes into play when there is explicit competition. For example, if we use KPIs and say, I'm going to compare you to your colleague, then most likely we're going to promote out for myself behavior. So I would encourage either avoiding that, comparative KPIs, or being very, very clear about the intent of the KPIs. Allow people to deliver in their areas of expertise, areas of strength, or areas of responsibility. So ideally, all of those are aimed. Areas of expertise and areas of strength and areas of responsibility. Allow them to deliver there. And don't necessarily go out of your way to compare them to other people. Because comparison, rather than motivating strong performance, may actually motivate out for myself, self-protective behavior, which in some ways may be expressed in behavior that is detrimental to their colleagues. So I hope that's helped. Do let me know if you have any further questions on that. Of course, that's not a complete answer, but I hope those have been helpful. So make KPIs clear, make expectations clear, make them measurable, measure them fairly, make them relevant. And then if you're going to stretch them, make that stretch motivating rather than demotivating. And I would say avoid comparative KPIs. Because comparative KPIs, number one, are relative. They usually aren't fixed. And they would, to my mind, promote out for myself behavior, or behavior that may even be detrimental to the colleagues. Next one. Okay, from Raymond. When there's low trust, people tend to fix the blame rather than really focus on the solution. Genuine concern is replaced by fear. That is true, Raymond. Thank you for sharing that. Trust creates the climate for creativity. Yes, because as we said in the very first question, it also promotes the climate and creates the climate for safety and a sense of belongingness. And when we feel like we're safe and we belong, we give our best, we push ourselves harder without necessarily looking to blame others, which is connected to Raymond's next statement. When we're trusted, we really give our best. We tend to drive ourselves harder than anybody could, provide such a powerful, compelling motivation to succeed, meet, or even exceed expectations. Thank you, Raymond. And I think, if you'll allow me, I'd actually like to attach that to question number 3, because that's one of the best ways to promote interdependence and avoid the silo trap, is by understanding and helping everyone in the team, in the organization, best understand that when we have the trust to be interdependent, and that will require vulnerability, then we can give our best. Everyone can give his or her best. And we can drive ourselves and contribute to the best of our abilities without people having to come at us with a whip. And that, I think, is one of the best situations we can find ourselves in, whether personally or professionally, a situation where we want to give our best, where we push ourselves rather than need to be pushed, where we feel valued rather than used, where we feel like we're contributing rather than checking off a box. Trust is all about safety. And trust allows people to feel safe, they feel like they belong, and feel like they're valued. So I hope that this has been a meaningful session for you. I know we've gone a bit long again, and I know it's 6 o'clock. So I'll end this session here, I'll close it here, and I'll simply mention how, I'll just go back to the way we started. And we said that this session was about success in trust. I've gone pretty deep, I think, into 3 questions that we've taken from you, our audience, our viewers. And I hope that that's allowed us to expound on and come to perhaps a deeper discussion and understanding on trust, the impact of trust, the value it brings, and its impact on our relationships, whether personal or professional. So we said success in trust could mean a number of things. The 2 that I outlined are success in building trust and trusting. And hopefully our discussions on questions 1 and 2, particularly, have helped us understand some steps, some behaviors, some practices that we can put into play in building trust and in trusting other people. And then the second dimension for success and trust that we outlined at the very beginning was success as a result of having high trust. And I think some of the answers to this were best articulated by you yourselves on the Slido screen. So people feel valued, better ideas, faster results, efficiency, more productivity from the previous question. And to my mind, some of the best results from having high trust are strong interdependence, people willing to be vulnerable because they feel safe, because they feel like they belong. People willing to put their best efforts in without counting the cost. People feeling like their work, their contributions were meaningful. Because whether you know it or not, feeling like the work that we're all doing is meaningful is critically important for our motivation, for our well-being, for our feeling of being valued and meaningful in our organizations, and even to ourselves in this life. So with that, I'll close this session on trust. Hopefully this has been meaningful for you. I invite you, as I mentioned, this is the last session in this series on real challenges, real solutions. So what I invite you to do next is stay tuned to our Facebook feed and our Facebook channel in Franklin Covey Philippines, because we'll be coming out with some content which may include snippets from previous sessions, which will bring out, perhaps the way I'd like to put it is the greatest hits, the best highlights, or which will highlight focal points in much shorter sessions. So in this session, we've gone around an hour and a half. We'll make our effort to bring in snippets, maybe even vignettes, which may only last a few minutes, but which will give you very pointed, valuable content. Stay tuned, and we'll be coming out with even more, hopefully even better content next year. So for now, in person, live, I'd like to greet you all happy holidays. I do hope that number 1, you stay safe and healthy. Stay safe, stay healthy, make the best decisions for yourselves, your families, the people you love, care for, and the people around you. Again, be mindful that any decision that we make individually, the way we behave in this current context, will very likely affect people both that we know and don't know, people that we dearly care about, and perhaps people we don't even know exist. They may be people just standing by the corner, but people that may be affected by our own actions. So stay safe, stay healthy, everyone, and I do hope to see you again all with us next year. For now, please stay tuned to our Facebook Live feed at Franklin Covey Philippines, and I will thank you. Wish you all a safe and happy Wednesday afternoon. Happy holidays, everyone. Stay safe. This has been Paolo, your facilitator. And again, at Franklin Covey, all we really aim to do is to help you and enable you to achieve greatness and success in the things which are most important, most meaningful to you. And I hope that today's session and this series has been helpful in that regard. See you all soon.